Some warnings are meant to be ignored, others seal your fate. When an ominous chest arrives, shrouded in darkness and the scent of forgotten decay, curiosity takes a treacherous turn. Are you ready to heed the warning, or will you open what should never be touched? I remember the day it arrived, a single, fog-drenched evening that seemed to seep into the very marrow of my bones, casting a pallor over the world as though it were cloaked in burial cloth. It was a cold dusk, with shadows stretching long and ominous over the damp streets, like spectral fingers grasping at unseen prey. The postman's voice, low and gruff, announced the arrival of a parcel from a family connection I scarcely remembered. There it stood, the chest solid, blackened wood, with tarnished brass hinges and a latch that gleamed faintly, like a sickly firefly caught in the grip of rot. A note accompanied it, pinned in a meticulous hand that felt familiar, yet entirely foreign. Under no circumstances should you open this chest, it read. A strange request from an unfamiliar benefactor. My gaze lingered on the paper, the words etched into my mind, but a hint of stubborn curiosity flared. I placed the chest in the shadowed corner of my study, telling myself that I would ignore it. Yet even then, a faint unease lodged itself in the recesses of my mind, a lingering itch that begged to be scratched. For several nights, I tried to heed the warning, ignoring the chest's quiet presence in the corner, wrapped in darkness. But its form loomed in my mind like a dark blight, a festering wound that no amount of time could heal. And then one night, just as the world hung silent, I heard it, a sound so soft, so slight, that at first I mistook it for the whisper of wind against the windows. Open me? The voice, a mere murmur, a slithering coil of sound slipping into my thoughts, was nearly indistinguishable from the quiet hum of the night, but it was there. It reverberated through the stillness, coiling itself around my mind like the delicate grip of spider silk. My pulse quickened. I sat rigid in my chair, straining to hear the sound again, but there was only silence, a hush so profound that it seemed to stretch the boundaries of reality, leaving me with a prickling sense of vulnerability. I managed to convince myself that it was a trick of the mind, the product of an overworked imagination. Yet, each night, the whisper returned, its tone more insistent, more beguiling. It gnawed at the edges of my sanity, a seduction impossible to ignore. The words varied. Look inside, release me, I am yours. And with each whisper, the voice grew bolder, each phrase more tempting, more potent. There was a dreadful allure to the words, a magnetism that seemed to tug at the deepest, most hidden parts of my mind. In the light of day, my fears receded, fading into the banalities of routine. But as evening fell, I felt its presence once more, like the press of unseen eyes upon my back. The study seemed to grow darker, shadows pooling around the chest as though it absorbed all light, leaving the room dim and hollow. The air carried a scent, a faint, musty odor of something ancient and forgotten, mingled with a hint of rot, as if the chest were imbued with secrets buried in the earth long ago. Days turned into a fevered daze of tension and anticipation. I avoided my study in the evenings, choosing instead to walk the cold, empty streets until exhaustion claimed me. Yet every time I returned, the chest awaited me, silent, immovable, as if it were a creature lying in ambush. My own home became an unfamiliar labyrinth of corners and darkened hallways, the silence weighed down with something intangible, an expectant hunger that I could not escape. Then, the whispers grew louder. They began not only at night, but in the dead hours of the afternoon, as sunlight flickered through the window in fractured, withering beams. The words became clearer, phrases longer and more detailed, clawing at the core of my resistance. It was as if the chest itself had claimed some part of my mind, implanting thoughts and desires I scarcely recognized as my own. My hands itched to reach for it, to pry open the latch and see what lay within, to shatter the mystery, once and for all. One evening, as the chill of twilight settled over the city, I could no longer resist. I moved closer to the chest, feeling the coarse grain of its wood beneath my fingertips, each splintered line like a map to some forgotten horror. My heart pounded, every nerve taut, ready to snap. And yet, even as my fingers brushed the cold latch, I hesitated. The warning burned in my mind, those words etched into my memory. Under no circumstances should you open this chest. It was as if the command had been a brand upon my soul, a barrier woven from fear and forbidden knowledge. But what harm could come from a mere glance? Surely, I could look without consequence, without succumbing to whatever darkness the chest held within. I lingered there, caught between curiosity and caution, the pulsing thrum of my heartbeat the only sound in the otherwise suffocating quiet. But then, a sound, a dull, almost inaudible thud. From inside the chest, my breath caught, and a shiver ran down my spine, the fine hairs at the nape of my neck standing on end. I waited, heart hammering, but the silence returned, thick and unyielding. Was it my mind playing tricks on me once again? Or had something within the chest moved of its own volition? Something alive, something waiting? I drew back, trembling, retreating to the other side of the room. I could not bring myself to look away. The chest seemed to mock me, its silent presence a constant reminder of the torment it could unleash, the secrets it harbored. I knew, even then, that I was bound to it, tethered by invisible strings of dread and fascination. And I could not escape, not anymore. I did not sleep that night, nor the nights that followed. The whispers continued, calling to me, luring me, each word a tantalizing promise of release, of discovery, of horror. The whispers grew. They intensified, creeping from the corners of the night into the edges of day, until my very thoughts were woven with their threads. I became their prisoner, helplessly ensnared, with no hope of release. My own voice was drowned out, overpowered by an incessant, soft plea that tugged at my reason. Every breath I took seemed to carry their echo, every heartbeat a subtle reminder of the presence of that blackened, cursed chest. Days dissolved into each other in a thick haze. I walked the streets with hollow eyes, barely seeing the bustling world around me. Friends would call my name, their voices like distant bells heard through layers of fog, but I paid them no heed. Each encounter with another person only reinforced the isolation that had closed around me. No one could understand the torment I bore. They could never fathom the dark allure of those whispers. And each night, when I returned to my home, the whispers resumed, relentless, as though they had awaited my arrival with insatiable hunger. In the darkness of my study, the chest awaited me. I would stand before it, heart pounding, each pulse of blood a painful reminder of my helplessness. I felt as though the chest were alive, a breathing creature that lay in wait, watching, knowing the havoc it was wreaking within me. Shadows clung to its edges, as if unwilling to abandon it, casting it in a shroud of murky darkness that seemed thicker than the night itself. The commands grew clearer. They were no longer whispers, but low, steady murmurs, urging me, demanding me to open it. Each word felt like a dagger pressed to my mind, carving away at my resistance. There were nights when I almost gave in, my fingers brushing the latch, trembling with the desire to see what lay within. But something stopped me each time, a cold, visceral terror, a reminder that whatever resided in the chest was not meant for mortal eyes. Yet even fear has its limits. One evening, the desperation reached a crescendo. The whisper had morphed into a voice, low and seductive, weaving tales of what lay hidden inside. There is freedom here, it promised. Freedom from guilt, from fear, from your past. The words echoed through my mind, and I staggered back, grasping at the edges of my sanity. But it was too late. The voice had nestled itself within me, a parasite feeding on my mind, and I knew that resistance was slipping from my grasp. The chest, even in its silence, seemed to grow more sinister, its very presence twisting the air around it. It exuded a faint odor, a musty stench of decay, mingled with something sweet and cloying, as though it bore the scent of the grave mixed with some forgotten, forbidden perfume. I could almost feel it breathing, as though it were a creature waiting to devour me whole. One night, I stood before it, and my hand drifted to the latch without thought. My fingers traced the cold brass, feeling each dent and scratch with an almost obsessive reverence. A thrill, dark and electric, shot through me as I contemplated opening it. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, hammering wildly as though trying to escape. The world around me seemed to fade, reduced to shadows and silence, leaving only me and the chest. I leaned forward, my breath mingling with the foul scent emanating from it. My vision blurred as I neared, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move within the shadowed engravings on its lid. A flicker, subtle yet unmistakable, as though the very wood shifted, warped with something hidden beneath. My mind was fraying, my thoughts spiraling into confusion. Was it possible that I had heard a faint scratching from within? Was there someone inside? "Open me," it hissed again, the words coiling around my mind, each syllable a venomous drop seeping into my soul. I pulled my hand away, trembling, and staggered back. A chill settled into my bones, and I could barely contain the terror that coursed through me. I was losing myself, piece by piece, my will shattered by an ancient force that I could neither see nor comprehend. I wanted to scream, to flee, to rid myself of the chest once and for all, but I knew it was too late. It had claimed me, and I could feel its dark influence seeping into my very soul, staining it like ink bleeding into water. My nights became nightmares, vivid and visceral. I dreamed of the chest, of its lid creaking open, releasing horrors upon the world. Visions of shadows slithering across the floor, of whispered promises and cries for help, of faces twisted in agony, watching, waiting. I would wake, drenched in sweat, only to find the chest in its place, silent yet omnipotent, a reminder that my reality was as haunted as my dreams. Each day, the urge grew stronger, a clawing, desperate need to see what lay inside. My mind twisted with thoughts of liberation, of an end to the whispers, of finally satisfying the hunger that gnawed at me. And so, I devised a plan. I would open it, just a crack, just enough to glimpse whatever lay within, and then seal it away, forever. But as the hours crept closer, as the time approached, a dread like I had never known gripped me. I felt as though I stood on the edge of an abyss, gazing down into an endless darkness that would swallow me whole. And yet I could not turn back. The chest had drawn me to it, a moth to flame, a doomed soul to the gates of its own damnation. I could feel my own resolve cracking, the whispers pushing me forward, each word an iron nail in the coffin of my resistance. The house grew colder, the air thick with an oppressive weight that pressed down upon me. The very walls seemed to breathe, creaking and shifting as though they were alive, complicit in the chest's insidious grip on my mind. Shadows lengthened and twisted, their forms merging and breaking apart in patterns that defied reason. I was losing myself, trapped in a waking nightmare from which there was no escape. I knew that, when the time came, I would have no choice but to obey. My fate was bound to the chest, and the thought filled me with a despair so profound that I could hardly bear it. I was slipping, sinking, spiraling into a darkness that promised nothing but horror and despair. "Open me?" The words echoed through the silence, a command that resonated deep within me, a call that I could no longer ignore. The night I opened the chest was darker than any I had ever known. The world outside lay silent, as if it too awaited the dreadful unveiling. Shadows crowded every corner, pressing in upon me, while the air felt thick, charged with something sinister, something hungry. The latch was cold beneath my fingers, and my hand trembled as I brushed it once, twice, hesitant and terrified. But the whispers had ceased. There was only silence, a silence so profound it pressed into my skull, filling my mind like a weight too heavy to bear. With a slow, shaking breath, I gripped the latch and lifted it. The sound of metal shifting, so slight yet piercing in the quiet, reverberated through the room, echoing against the walls like a dirge. I lifted the lid, inch by inch, each creak of the hinges like a warning that I should have heeded. But my will was gone, shattered by the ceaseless call of the chest. I could no longer resist. I had surrendered myself entirely to its lure. Inside, at first, I saw only darkness, a void so deep and consuming that it seemed to swallow the faint light in the room. But as my eyes adjusted, shapes began to form. Faint outlines of objects nestled within the shadows. The smell hit me then, a suffocating stench of decay and mildew mixed with a sweetness that made my stomach turn. It was the scent of something long dead, something forgotten, hidden away from the world until this very moment. My fingers brushed against the first object, a brittle piece of paper that crackled beneath my touch. I lifted it, and the dim light revealed faded ink scrawled in a familiar, shaky hand. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized it. A letter, written in my own hand from a time I had long buried. The words were jumbled, chaotic, filled with admissions and confessions, regrets that I had once whispered only to myself in the dead of night. It was as though the chest had unearthed the very essence of my guilt, brought forth the darkest corners of my soul in tangible form. One by one, I lifted more objects from the chest. A photograph, its edges yellowed and frayed, depicted faces I thought I'd forgotten. Faces haunted by pain and sorrow, looking directly at me as if they had awaited this moment. They were people I had wronged, people whose lives had been marred by my choices, my selfishness, my sins. The photograph felt alive in my hand, the faces twisting in agony, their eyes piercing through the decades, judging me, condemning me. My hands shook as I reached deeper into the chest, pulling out tokens of my own guilt. A piece of cloth, stained and torn, brought with it memories of a night I had tried desperately to erase from my mind. A ring, tarnished and dull, symbolizing a promise I had broken, a vow shattered in a moment of weakness. Each object was a fragment of my past, a relic of my sins, and each held within it a piece of my soul that I had lost along the way. And then I found the letter, the final damning piece. It was a single, yellowed sheet, its edges curling with age, and the handwriting was not my own. The words were penned in that meticulous, careful script, the same handwriting as the note that had accompanied the chest. "You cannot hide from your past forever," it read. "It will find you, just as I have." A shiver ran through me as the truth settled, cold and sharp as a knife. The chest had not come to me by chance. It had been sent, delivered with purpose, by someone who knew me, who knew the secrets I had buried and the shame I had tried to escape. And they had ensured that I could no longer run, that I would be forced to confront the horrors of my own making. The room began to spin, the shadows shifting and writhing as though they were alive. I staggered back, dropping the letter, and gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. My mind reeled, my thoughts a torrent of fear and regret. I could feel something cold creeping up my spine, a presence that seemed to seep from the chest itself, filling the room with a suffocating weight. And then the whispers returned, louder than ever, no longer murmurs but full, echoing voices, each one familiar, each one accusing. They were the voices of those I had wronged, voices that clawed at my mind, tearing into my conscience with brutal force. They spoke of betrayal, of broken promises, of lives ruined by my actions. Their words wrapped around me, binding me in a web of guilt and terror from which there was no escape. I staggered backward, clutching my head, trying to drown out the voices, but they only grew louder, pressing in on me from all sides. My surroundings blurred, distorted, the walls seeming to close in, the shadows deepening, reaching out as if to pull me into their dark embrace. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, as the voices rose to a deafening crescendo, each one a shard of pain and regret that pierced my soul. My vision swam, and in that dizzying haze, I saw them, the faces from the photographs from my past, flickering in the darkness. They loomed over me, eyes wide and hollow, mouths twisted in silent screams, expressions frozen in the agony that I had caused. I could feel their anger, their suffering, their hatred pressing down upon me, crushing me beneath the weight of my own sins. Desperation clawed at me, and I reached for the chest, as though closing it might silence the horrors I had unleashed. But my hands were numb, trembling, my strength sapped by the relentless assault on my mind. The voices continued, relentless, demanding penance, demanding justice, demanding that I pay for every wrong I had committed. In that moment, I understood. The chest was not a curse, nor was it a punishment sent by another. It was a reflection, a mirror held up to my own soul, forcing me to confront the truth I had long avoided. It was the embodiment of my guilt, my shame, my sins made manifest, and there was no escaping its judgment. The voices swirled around me, each word a searing brand upon my mind, a reminder of every failure, every betrayal. I was trapped, bound to the chest by my own guilt, condemned to face the shadows of my past for all eternity. The weight of my sins pressed down upon me, suffocating, unrelenting, and I knew that I would never be free. The chest had claimed me, body and soul, and in that moment of despair, I surrendered. I was no longer a man, but a shadow, a vessel for the guilt that would haunt me until the end of time. I do not know how long I lay there on the floor, shivering in the darkened silence. The room was thick with the memory of those voices, lingering like smoke, their echoes twisting through my mind in endless, looping patterns. The shadows around me seemed alive, pulsing and breathing, feeding on the terror that had taken root within me. I was empty, drained, hollow, my mind trapped in an endless descent, spiraling downward into a chasm of my own making. The chest remained open, its lid lifted like a gaping mouth poised to devour. Yet it was quiet now, as if it too had been satiated, as though the act of revealing my sins had somehow calmed its relentless hunger. I stared into its depths, my vision blurring as the darkness within seemed to swell, spreading outward until it engulfed the room, the walls, the very air I breathed. And then, softly at first, I felt the familiar tug of those whispers, a faint echo that grew louder, more insistent, until the silence was broken once more. "You cannot escape," they hissed. "This is your burden, your prison." I clutched my head, pressing my palms to my temples, trying to block out the sound. But it was useless. The voices were not merely sounds, but thoughts, woven into the fabric of my mind. They taunted me, slipping through every crack, every vulnerable corner, burrowing deeper with each passing second. My own memories twisted into grotesque, mocking shapes. Moments of joy turned sour, laughter warped into screams, faces I once cherished now twisted in contempt. In my desperation, I stumbled to my feet, staggering away from the chest as though distance could somehow free me from its grip. But my own house had become a prison, the walls warped and unfamiliar, each shadow hiding some dark reflection of my soul. The door was closed, locked as though by some unseen hand, and I clawed at it in panic, feeling the splinters bite into my skin. There was no escape. I was trapped, bound to this place, to the chest, to the weight of my sins. The whispers grew louder, swelling into a cacophony that filled the room, each voice distinct yet melding into a single, terrible chant. "You belong to me," they intoned. "You will suffer. You will repent." I fell back, retreating into the corner, my back pressed against the cold wall, my eyes fixed on the chest. It seemed to loom larger, its edges indistinct, shifting in the dim light as though it were more shadow than substance. I could feel it drawing me in, pulling at the edges of my soul, unearthing every buried memory, every shameful thought, every moment of weakness that I had tried so desperately to forget. The darkness within me was laid bare, raw and unrelenting, exposed to the unyielding gaze of the chest. And as I stared into its depths, I felt a terrible certainty settle within me. The chest was not merely an object, nor was it a manifestation of my guilt. It was a doorway, a threshold that separated the world of the living from something far darker, far more consuming. I had opened it, and in doing so, I had unleashed a part of myself that could never be silenced, never be contained. I closed my eyes, praying for the darkness to take me, for the oblivion that had once seemed so terrifying to finally swallow me whole. But even in the darkness, the whispers persisted, clawing at my mind, digging deeper, tearing through every layer of my soul until there was nothing left but a hollow shell, a vessel for the sins I could no longer deny. And then, as though in answer to my silent plea, the whispers began to fade, their echoes retreating into the farthest corners of my mind, leaving only silence in their wake. It was a silence unlike any I had ever known, a cold, hollow void that seemed to stretch into eternity, vast and unending. I opened my eyes, expecting to find myself alone, the chest closed, the nightmare over. But the chest remained open, its dark mouth yawning wide, as if waiting, as if hungry. Slowly, I rose to my feet, drawn forward by an unseen force, my body moving as though compelled by something beyond my control. I approached the chest, my gaze locked on its depths, feeling the pull of its darkness, the promise of oblivion that lay within. My hand reached out, trembling, yet steady, as I lowered the lid, feeling the weight of it settle beneath my fingers. And then, in the silence, I heard it, a faint, muffled whisper, so soft it could have been mistaken for the sigh of the wind. "One more," it murmured, "just one more." A shiver ran through me, and I pulled my hand away, feeling as though the very air had turned to ice. The chest was closed now, its secrets hidden once more, but I knew that they would never truly be silent. They had left their mark upon me, etched into the very marrow of my bones, a weight that I would carry with me for the rest of my days. The whispers had ceased, but their echo remained, a faint, insidious murmur that lingered at the edge of my mind, a reminder of the darkness that lay within me. I could feel it, coiled like a serpent, waiting, watching, ready to strike at the first sign of weakness. I was free, yet bound, released from the chest, yet forever tethered to its shadow. And as I walked away, leaving the chest to its silence, I knew that the whispers would never truly leave me. They were a part of me now, as inescapable as the past, as indelible as the sins I had tried so desperately to bury. I had opened the chest, and in doing so, I had opened a door within myself, a door that could never be closed, a darkness that could never be silenced. And in the stillness of the night, as I lay alone, I could almost hear it, the faint, hollow echo of a whisper, calling to me from the depths of my soul, a voice that would haunt me until the end of my days. One more! Remember, some doors, once open, can never be closed,